Talk with Leola. If you're tuning in for the very first time, I ask that you please subscribe and hit the notification bell. If you've been a part of this journey, I hope you thoroughly enjoy this episode. So, in today's episode, discuss all things Mamelodi Sundowns versus Kaizer Chiefs. So, the Dstv Premiership is back with the bang on the opening fixture, the opening weekend of the restart of Dstv Premiership does see Mamelodi Sundowns taking on Kaizer Chiefs. So, on today's episode, I'm going to do a tactical preview of Mamelodi Sundowns versus Kaizer Chiefs. However, before I get into it, there are two segments dedicated at looking at both clubs in depth separately. So I will then start with Kaizer Chiefs and we'll then have a look at how they've started life in the Dstv Premiership of this season. So Kaizer Chiefs then started against TS Galaxy. That was the opening encounter where they played to a 0-0 draw, which, it was a boring encounter. Kaizer Chiefs failed to create a lot of clear-cut chances. And as a result of that, it ended as 0-0. And if I'm not mistaken, like one shot on target. And that was just a very poor performance. Very lethargic as well, We lacked a lot of creativity and a lot of fluidity and energy in that game. And as a result of that, a lot of people were left unhappy. And then the second game, they played against Baroka at FNB Stadium, which ended 2-1 in Kaizer Chiefs' favor. Cardoso and Billiard getting the goals on the day, with Dolly being voted for as the man of the match. And he performed really, really well. Having Dolly coming into the lineup changed a lot of things for Kaizer Chiefs. They looked a lot more positive, they looked a lot more energetic, and it was a much better performance from Kaizer Chiefs. But when we then have a look at this Kaizer Chiefs side. So Kaizer Chiefs will be represented by the red team. So Kaizer Chiefs have started in the season. They have started with Bruce. Bruce has played both games. At right back, they've had Blom. They've had two centre-halves in Mato as the right-sided centre-half, Cardoso as the left-sided centre-half, and then they've had Sfiso Hlanti at left-back. So it's been a consistent defence so far, and one clean sheet and one goal conceded, So from that perspective, one would say then it has been good showings from the defense. But in my opinion, I think the best player out of this defense so far has been Blom at right back. I think he's performed really well, and to a certain degree, a lot of the Kaizer Chiefs faithful felt like there was a crisis at right back, but Blom has been able to kill all that doubt and has shown us that as the Kaizer Chiefs faithful, we can be relaxed because he is there in that right back position and he's made it his own. So he's performed very well. The two centre halves, yes, against TS Galaxy, they did keep a clean sheet. But I think you have to give it a lot more perspective with regards to the in-depth analysis. And you have to look at how TS Galaxy had set up in that game. So TS Galaxy didn't really, they weren't really coming out to challenge and actually win the game. They were more interested in catching Kaizer Chiefs on the counter. So they didn't institute a high press. What they went with was a mid to low block. So they variate during the game, a different phase of the game. And look, they didn't really create too many chances themselves, And as a result of that, we managed to get the clean sheet. And I wouldn't say they were tested, but whenever they were at least able to make sure that they don't concede on the day. Sfiso Hlanti in that game for me was very lackadaisy and didn't really put on a good showing. And then the second game against Baroka, it was a much better performance, from Blom. He even got the assist for the first goal, beautiful assist, and he played really well at right back that evening. I even think that after Dolly, he would have been my man of the match, very solid at right back. But there's a problem here at centre half which needs to be addressed with this centre back pairing. Firstly, I just think that as a pair they have been struggling, and it's sort of baffling because they've been playing together for a while. You'd like to think that there would be more or less a cohesive understanding, but the way they read the game and how they develop the game as well, they lose balls and too many mistakes at times, from this experienced pair, which then leads Bruce at times to come out and to actually try either punch those balls or catch those balls, and he ends up making a mistake himself, and that's because he doesn't trust his centre back pairing. So there are problems there at centre half, but we do know that we won't see change anytime soon because Stuart Baxter has come out and reiterated the importance of keeping an experienced pair. And when you look at the two centre halves they've signed in Tabani Dube and Jabulo Ngobo, they don't have that experience that he requires, and they don't have the acumen and the know-how to fit into his system as opposed to how these two have fitted into his system. So we're not going to see a change there. If we are to see a change, it will be either Jabulo Ngobo or Tabani Dube partnering, one of the two. But we're not going to see a complete change at centre-back with regards to the partnership. But going forward then, I just think that they have to work on their decision-making when they get onto the ball and when they're developing phase, in the build-up phase, especially when players like Nange and Alexander show up in the consolidation phase to collect the ball, because against TS Galaxy, for example, and this has happened against TS Galaxy and Baroka, where you find that Mator is on the ball and we're in a very comfortable build-up phase, which is transitioning into consolidation phase, and then he'd make one mistake and one pass wrong, and then that would see us go from being comfortable in build-up phase to then having to scramble back and defend just because of one bad pass, and we find ourselves under pressure. So things like that have to get cut out from Mator and Cardoso's game. I do know that they're in their 30s now, and how do you coach that out of experienced players, but those mistakes could prove costly, especially when you come up against elite opposition, an opposition who will make use of that. So very important then that they keep it tight at the back and they minimize the mistakes that they make. Also their communication has to be a lot better, and we have to see a better defensive triangle from Chiefs' perspective. They have to get to a point where they're on the same wavelength and the communication is a lot better. At left back, Hlanti has improved, I must say. Against Baroka, he delivered the assist. So also very important to note that both fullbacks have registered assists. So from an offensive perspective, the fullbacks are chipping in, so which is good to see. And so far so good to a certain degree, but obviously there are changes we would like to see being instituted in Mabiliso and the two centre-halves coming in, but it's a question of experience. So this is the back four we will see going into further on into the season. In goals, Bruce has started, but once Kune is fit, I would like to presume that he slots right in. And then the two defensive midfielders, we've had Alexander, and then we've had Patucheza Nange. So these two I've been happy with. It's just from a depth perspective, there's a gay on the bench. And my qualm then is, if anything were to happen to one of these two, then you're looking at potentially a gay coming in, which I think then, he's not a right fit. But here's an unpopular opinion. Let's have a look at it from a different perspective. You've got Reef Frosler on the bench, who we know that from a defensive perspective, as a fullback, he struggles. But going forward, from a qualitative perspective, he ticks the box. And from a technical perspective, very good. So I then think we should be looking at a Frosler being used and instituted as a deep-laying midfielder, to deputize for a Patucheza Nange or Cole Alexander when one of them get injured. I think that would still predicate for quality and ball progression within the midfield with regards to how Kaizer Chiefs build up. So that's what I would look to do in the midfield. And then the three so far, on the right, it's been Sekota or Dolly. I think both of them have been very good. but most notably Dolly. Dolly has been great for Kaizer Chiefs. However, I'd look to institute both. So have Dolly on one side and have Sikhota on the other side, because what would that do then? It would give us so much balance and fluidity in vertical zone 1 and 2, and then vertical zone 5 and 4 whenever we look to go forward, because now the back line of the opposition would be very occupied. It wouldn't be a lopsided approach where on one side we're overloaded and we're looking to attack, but on both sides we're looking to attack. On both sides we've got equally strong players. So that's what I would be looking to do. But you got Dolly, you'd have Nukovic on the left, and then you'd have Parker. So these two have been a problem for me, because whenever Kaizer Chiefs look to play and they are going through their strides with regards to progressing the ball upfield into consolidation phase and looking to break into incision phase, whenever these two get onto the ball, the game slows down. In turn, that affects the passing patterns and the movement of the ball. And especially when you've got such free-flowing, fluid football being instituted by a Kama Biliat and a Keegan Dolly, I just think to complement these two, you need a Sikhota and you need a Ngobo, because what would that do then? We would see a much more free-flowing, fluid game of football. And we don't always see that. Against Baroka, we saw that, but to a certain degree, it was limited, because whenever it gets to Parker, it would break down. Nukovic, he'd have to control the ball 2-3 times and then release the pass. Whereas with your Ngobos and Sikhotas, they're very much intertwined with your Biliat and Dolly. They play off the cuff. It's one touch into them, one pass, they spin off, And you could institute a lot of third-man runs. So what you could see is, triangulation being instituted, and then sort of a third or fourth man run. So what you would see is then, you would see Biliat there, you'd have Ngobo there, and then you'd have, let's say, a Keegan Dolly, and then you've got Sikhota. And what I love about this is that on both sides, you could be using third man run, and you could use a third man run where you have a supporting player running with, or sort of a fourth man run in a sense. So, in a sense, what you could do, because what Kaizer Chiefs were doing really well against Baroka is that it was free, it was flowing, it was fluid, and they were making these runs, especially Biliat with Dolly on this side, and they were breaking down the opposition, especially in vertical zone 4, starting from vertical zone 5 and then vertical zone 4, and then having Kama Biliat pop up in zone 14 and vertical zone 3. So what you could see is, for example, you could see maybe Ngobo with the ball, he plays it into Biliat, Biliat lays it off, and then Dolly looking then for that pass into there, that's Kama Biliat. Or sometimes what you could see is Dolly's on the ball, he plays it into Biliat, Biliat drops it off, third man run by a Sikhota into the central spaces. Because what they do very well is that they sort of step up, and what they do is that they drag the opposition. So when they drag the opposition, they're looking for that space in behind. So you could see that from Kaizer Chiefs. You could see a third man run, and then you could also see triangulation passing pattern, which then releases the third man run and then has a supporting run coming with them. So that's what I would personally do. But look, with Stuart Baxter, we do know that it's going to be Biliat, it's going to be Nukovic, it's going to be Parker. Also, a special mention does go to Sabelo Khateb, another player who could be instituted into this lineup. Manyama, apparently he is back in full training. Hopefully, let's see how he can be used. Hopefully, he can be used as a false nine, as I think that would be his best suited position and best suited role within this Kaizer Chiefs side. Dumisani Zuma is another one who could impact. So far, so good. In certain areas, it's looking good for Kaizer Chiefs. And that's what they could be looking to do, as I will go into deep tactical analysis in the extra time segment, as I do a tactical analysis of their game between them and Mamelodi Sundowns. However, let's move on then to Mamelodi Sundowns, and let's have a look at Mamelodi Sundowns with regards to how they've kickstarted the season. So like Chiefs, they've got sort of a similar record. It's played 2, drawn 1, won 1. So the two that they've played Amazulu. That was the opening fixture, and then they played against Chippa United. So against Amazulu, they won 1-0, courtesy of a Zwane penalty. And yeah, but against AmaZulu, they struggled. They struggled to institute that free-flowing football that they normally would in vertical zone 2 and vertical zone 4 as well. So they struggled because they were not able to penetrate those half spaces and overload in the midfield. AmaZulu were very smart on the day. They packed the midfield. As I always say, whenever you do come up against Sundowns, if you can pack the midfield and institute a brave approach against Sundowns, then they will struggle. So they have struggled. And most notable lineup, yes, there were changes made in the MTN 8, but the most notable lineup has been Onyango in goals. Right side at centre half, they've had Grant Kekana. Libero, they've had Rivaldo Kutsia. As the left side at centre half, they've had Deruk. They've had Mvala. They've had Hashim Domingo. Mudao was there, but he got injured against Chippa United. So Tapelo Morena came in. And then at left wing back, they've had Lila K. And then up front, look, they've had Shalulile as the mainstay. And then they've had Mudiba and Serino. But at some point, Mahema started against Chippa, against AmaZulu, Zwane started, but those two have not come back into the lineup. With Zwane, picked up an injury, and then I think Mahema, against Chippa United, didn't really threaten. So that's why he fell out of the starting lineup. But yeah, that's what it's been like for Sundowns. But in open play, in Dstv Premiership football, they haven't scored a goal yet, which can be a bit worrying for this Sundown side, considering the type of players they have and their approach to games and how they normally institute their style of play. So, yeah, it can be a bit worrying, but I attribute that to, look, the regular shape that Sundowns would have in opposition half is that you will have them occupy, obviously, vertical zone 2, vertical zone 4. That is when we're reading the game from this side now, so it sort of changes. And then you have Tapelo Muren and vertical zone 5 giving the width. You've got Lila K, vertical zone 1 giving the width. And then you've got the 2 in midfield. And then you got sort of Kutsia as the libero, you got Grant Kekana, and then you got Rushin Duruk. So this is normally what they would shape up like in the opposition half. Very offensive. And whenever opposition have come up against Sundowns, what they're doing now is that they're starting to close certain passing channels, especially vertical zone 4 and vertical zone 2, and then they protect zone 14 because that's where Mamelodi Sundowns normally are able then to penetrate and are able to pick teams off, create chances, and then score goals. So what teams are doing now is that they'll have a bank of 4 and 5, and then they close the spaces. And when they close the spaces, it now becomes very difficult. Shalulile becomes isolated, but he's boxed. He's boxed in here, and they make sure they squeeze the midfield, And now, Mamelodi Sundowns normally love to institute a numerical advantage in the midfield, with Rivaldo Kutsia and then having the 2 number 10s. So, when they have Zwane and they have Serino, what they're good for is that they come in and then it sort of becomes a numerical advantage. It can become a 4 versus 3. So you've got your 4 midfielders in there. So you'd have Mvala, you'd have Domingo, you'd have Serino, you'd have Zwane versus 3 midfielders, right? That's what it would look like, But now, when you then have an Aubrey Mudiba, and then you have a Serino. Serino can come, but he's not as great as doing that as Zwane. So even then, they don't have the numerical advantage then at times, Sometimes, yes, Rivaldo Kutsia would join with Zwane. Do you understand? It becomes sort of a 5 versus 3. But then the striker would have to drop, and then it becomes a 5 versus 4. They'd have that numerical advantage, and they'd have a Zwane and Serino who know how to manipulate. But with Serino, he's a bit further up, because that's what he's better suited further up. Zwane can start from deep, he comes in, but he's better suited at manipulating. So, Sundowns, yes, they've had the numerical advantage, but the personnel, in Toby Vala and Hashim Domingo, in Mudiba and Serino, yeah, these 4 aren't the best at doing this for Mamelodi Sundowns when it comes to the numerical advantage. They aren't the best, especially when you look at Vala, in my own opinion. I think he struggles because when teams set up like this against Sundowns, you need a midfielder who's very good at taking risks, A. B, who can squeeze in passes in the half space, squeeze in passes in central zones, and find the player's feet. Now, Vala doesn't do that. He looks for the safer pass. So you'll see him even coming out deep like that, and then the safe pass is into Murena. The safe pass is when Mudiba drops maybe too deep. That's the safe pass. Now you need a midfielder who's got a pass that can break the eye of the needle pass. So the pass which can split, it eliminates two men and he's in there. You know, that pass that he found against Kaizer Chiefs in the MTN 8 that got Zwane in, he picked up the ball in that area, he split two men, Zwane gets the ball, finishes. We need to see more of that from him if he's to be in midfield going forward. But Sundowns have struggled in this area, and this is the area that Sundowns normally win matches in. So that's where it's been a problem for Mamelodi Sundowns. And I think it's a personnel issue because you get Zwane back, you get Serino back, and then you get Jali and you get Nkulisi. Different ball game, because now they know how to institute with Rivaldo Kutia then joining. But now with them not having that numerical advantage, sometimes with Rivaldo Kutia, especially if you're playing against a team that is quick on the counter, he then is wary to the counter. So sometimes you won't always join too much, because sometimes you're thinking, okay, fine, if I join and we lose the ball, we're very exposed. So sometimes he's been a bit conservative, because also they have not been the best when it comes to retaining the ball. But when you've got your trusted players in your Zwane, Serino, Jali, and Kulisi, you know they retain the ball very well. They retain the ball a lot better than Hashim, Domingo, and Vala. So he can then join. And then it becomes that 5 versus 3, 5 versus 4 numerical advantage in the central zone, in vertical zone 3. So that's where Sundowns have struggled, in my opinion. And if they can get those players fully fit, I think then they start to dominate again. But let's head off then into the extra time segment where we have a tactical preview of Mamelodi Sundowns versus Kaizer Chiefs. It is a repeat of the MTN 8 fixture, which was played in Peli, where Sundowns won on penalties. You know, very excited for this one because both teams have had international break. So both teams have had ample time to work on certain facets and nuances that they've been struggling with, and hopefully we see better quality from both sides, you know, going into this game. So both teams have had a good rest, and both teams have picked up with regards to match fitness and fitness as well. So I'm very excited going into this one. So let's have a look then. The red team will represent Kaizer Chiefs. The blue team will represent Mamelodi Sundowns. When we have a look at Kaizer Chiefs then, like I have mentioned, in goals, most likely you'll have Bruce, if not Bruce, Kune. And then the back four stays the same. I always mention that anything can change, you know, as I do record days in advance. So certain things do happen during the week. At the training session, a player can pick up a knock, or, you know, anything can happen. Or a coach can see something and then he wants to tweak it. But I'm going with the most likely. So the back four then being Blom at right back, two centre halves. You've got Matoho and Cardoso. Cardoso as the left-sided centre half, Matoho as the right-sided centre half. You've got Sfiso Hlanti. You've got the double pivot of Nange and Alexander. You've got Nukovic starting there. You've got Parker. You've got Biliat, who starts now in a 9 position. And then you've got Keegan Dolly. I think this past 2 weeks has done him a world of good. I think you'd have picked up match fitness, but wouldn't be surprised to see Sikhota starting. And then when we look at Sundowns, then we do know that a couple of players are back. So Nascimento's back. It looks like Zwane is also back in training, so they could look to feature in this side, but most likely anything can change. Let's go with the most likely. Onyango in goals, Grant Kekana as the right-sided centre half. We've got Kutia as your libero, and then you got Rushin Duruk. But if Nascimento is fully fit and ready to go, you could have Rushin Duruk as the right-sided centre half, and then Nascimento as the left-sided centre half, going back to his natural position where he's very comfortable. Then you got Kutia as the libero. But we will say Grant Kekana Kutsia, and Rushin Duruk. But on Grand Kekana, we can say Grand Kekana / Nascimento, then the swap. So in midfield, then you've got Vala and Hashim Domingo possibly continuing. But to note, in the MTN8 fixture against Golden Arrows, we saw a much more positive performance from Sundowns, and they went with Jali and Kulisi in there, which is what I personally think should happen. I'd like to see Jali and Kulisi being reinstated back into the heart of midfield, but Mvala and Hashim Domingo, Laila K, Tapelo Murena, you got Shalulile, you got Serino. Erasmus started the last time, but if Zwane is fully fit, then he slots back in, and then you've got that front three. So this is how then the game will shape up from a formations perspective and approach perspective. With Kaizer Chiefs, you've got the 4-2-3-1. With Sundowns, you've got the 3-4-3 that they love to institute. So let's look at Kaizer Chiefs then and have a look at who will be key. So for Kaizer Chiefs, Keegan Dolly. And look, he's going to be very instrumental because when Keegan Dolly played against Baroka, we saw a very different performance for Kaizer Chiefs, and what he did in vertical zone 4 was absolutely amazing. And this is where he can get Sundowns, because now when Sundowns play with the back 3, vertical zone 5 and vertical zone 4 are always, in a sense, you could exploit those channels, because the confusion then becomes with the fullback, with the wing back and the left-sided center half, who picks up who at times, if you have a successful overload, so let's just push the guys in there. And and if you remember very well, when Keegan Dolly played against Sundowns in the MTN8, he came on and he picked up the ball in this position and he played that lovely ball into Kama Billiard, who made a beautiful run and then finished with the Blom. So you must always be cognizant of how dangerous Dolly is, especially when he starts out wide and then he comes into and he drifts into this half space, which is vertical zone 4. So I think Keegan Dolly will be key for this Kaizer Chiefs side. He gives them so much energy and impetus going forward. So I've highlighted him as the key player. And the other key player to look at is Njabulo Blom. And the relationship that is developing down this right-hand side with Keegan Dolly and Njabulo Blom is absolutely phenomenal with regards to how much potential it has. Because when Keegan Dolly occupies vertical zone 4, Njabulo Blom will occupy vertical zone 5. And that's this wide channel going out wide. And he can deliver a very mean cross on him. And we've already seen that there's this beautiful synergy which is developing between them. They read the game on a similar wavelength. So much so that against Baroka, when Kaizer Chiefs had overloaded the left-hand side, this was actually a beautiful goal, actually, a beautiful build-up as well. They'd overloaded the left-hand side, and a ball then was played into Keegan Dolly. Keegan Dolly, what he did was, he saw that Blom was making the run. As Blom was making the run, Keegan Dolly stepped inside into vertical zone 4. When he stepped into vertical zone 4, that ball being rolled into him, he acted as if he was going to go for the ball, and then he just left it. When he left it, the ball rolled into this area. Blom runs onto it. Kama Billiard comes in. Runs being made into the box. He plays it into him. Beautiful first-time finish. And that's what they did very well. And that's because on the right-hand side, there's this beautiful partnership being instituted between Keegan Dolly and Njabulo Blom. Those are the players to watch out for. And from a defensive perspective, also, how does Njabulo Blom deal with Lila K? Whenever Mamelodi Sundowns do look to overload, the right-hand side being their vertical zone 5 and then looking to switch to vertical zone 1 to attack on this side. So from Kaizer Chiefs' perspective, Njabulo Blom, Keegan Dolly, key players going into this encounter. So when we then shift the perspective and have a look at Mamelodi Sundowns as to who will be their key players, it's going to be very interesting, this encounter. Coming back from the break, you'd like to think both teams are fully fit. They're raring to go. They want to get those 3 points and build on that momentum. So when we have a look at Sundowns, bit of a tricky one, because we don't know with regards to fitness. Where's Themba Zwane? Is he coming back? What's happening? But if he does come back, I'd like to think that he's going to be absolutely paramount for Mamelodi Sundowns, especially like I mentioned in the half spaces for Sundowns, and also being able to institute that numerical advantage they have in the midfield in vertical zone 3 whenever they look to overload from a central perspective. So Zwane, very key in this encounter, and going to be very interesting then to see then as to how the rest of the team go about their business, and Lila K as well, Lila K, very important. So I see this battle as it's going to be this battle from the right-hand side of Kaizer Chiefs and then the left-hand side of Mamelodi Sundowns, because Lila K has been absolutely instrumental and pivotal to how Sundowns go forward and how he also looks to deliver those balls into the box. So, ladies and gentlemen, we've come to an end of yet another special episode of Disky Talk with Leolo. I thoroughly enjoyed breaking down both Kaizer Chiefs and Mamelodi Sundowns, but I can't leave without giving a prediction. So, I think this is going to be a mouth-watering encounter, and to a certain degree, I think it's going to be a very open game where both teams will go at each other at certain periods. But with this one, look, if Zwane is back and Zwane, Serino, Shalulile start, and in midfield you've got Jali and Kulisi, then I'll give it to Mamelodi Sundowns 2-1. But if the above-mentioned names aren't included into the starting lineup, then I think Kaizer Chiefs have just slightly an upper hand, and then if it's that way, then I'll give it to Kaizer Chiefs 2-1. So it's Mamelodi Sundowns 2-1, subject to those players coming in. But if they don't, I think then Kaizer Chiefs have the upper hand on this one. So thank you very much for tuning in to yet another special episode of Disky Talk with Leolo. I thoroughly enjoyed this one. Signing out.